All right. Just wanted to first start off by thanking the organizers for inviting me. It's a true honor. So today I'm going to be presenting about an academic journal article that just came out in the Perspectives on Terrorism journal a few weeks ago. It's the first empirical study looking at the Islamic State's media, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the findings that I had. So the data collection for this was a few months ago, and I wanted to get a snapshot of the Islamic State's official media. Since they put out so much content, I felt that looking at one particular week would be sufficient, especially since over that 1 week time span, they put out about 123 different releases. What's important about this too, besides just the aspect of them putting out this official content online, is that there's these things locally in Iraq and Syria, and now Libya as well, called Nuqtat al-I'lamiyya, which are just media points, where on the ground in Syria, Iraq, and Libya, they're passing out these releases, whether it's in a paper copy, whether it's in CDs or USB sticks, highlighting that this is relevant not only to the content online being broadcast to a broader global audience, especially the West, that they're trying to influence, but also those on the ground as well. And I just listed also the different Twitter accounts, which are key official dissemination accounts online for them, because they constantly get taken offline, that you have to keep up with them over time. So they put out about 18 different releases every day officially, and they made up 24 of their 33 wilayat, or provinces, that go from all the different areas, whether it's Iraq, Syria, Libya, or to the broader spectrum that we saw in the previous presentation. As you can tell, the vast majority of the releases were actually from Syria and in Iraq. But the interesting thing is that while 58% of their provinces are from Syria and Iraq, 81% of the media releases were actually from Syria and Iraq, highlighting that the Islamic State is trying to alter the perception on how much support or activities they might be doing in different spheres of influence. And this is one of the key things that the Islamic State does, is they try and alter the perceptions of those who are following what they're doing, in part because most people are following it in a real-time process. They're not necessarily breaking it down specifically every single day, so therefore it seems a lot larger and they're doing a lot more than they necessarily actually are. And then this just breaks it down further by the country specifically and not the actual provinces. One of the interesting things about the Islamic State that they've done, which was alluded to in the prior presentation, is that before 2013, the organization only had one media outlet, Al-Furqan Media. But afterwards, they started to decentralize it more, where they had a bunch of different types of media organizations, whether it's Amaq News Agency, whether it's Al Bayan Radio, Al Hayat Media, and then they also have the media outlet for their Sharia committee. But the most important thing that's occurred now that they've taken over territory and really put in these state structures to govern based off of their own interpretations of how to put that into practice, is that they have these provincial level media accounts now, and they account for 78% of the media content that they are putting out. And this highlights that it's not as centralized as it used to be, because they've been able to provide the know-how and knowledge to those locally in the specific provinces that they're operating in. I imagine that there might be some post-production and editing still by the central media hub, but it shows that the level of knowledge is expanded in terms of their media teams. And one of the interesting things that we've seen, especially since they've exported their model outside of Iraq and Syria, is that once they start doing media operations in, say, Libya or the Sinai or Nigeria or Yemen or AFPAC region, is that all of these provincial level media accounts are then released through the same platforms on Twitter, suggesting that even though you hear people talking about, oh, this IS affiliate in so-and-so country, the reality is that there is direct command and control over the media operations from the central organization in Iraq and Syria over what's going on in the broader sphere of where they're operating outside of that central hub. One of the interesting things too, I think that's important to note, which not necessarily relevant in terms of academic work, but in terms of the media coverage of this, is that a lot of the times they focus solely on the content coming out in English or maybe a particular language of somebody's country that they're directing the content to. But as I found in my research, only about 6.5% of the content during the particular week I looked at, the official media releases, was actually in English, and that all of the releases were in Arabic, and that if we're really trying to understand the media itself and what they're putting out, we need to really look at the content in Arabic. And we have to remember that at the end of the day, while they want to talk about this broader, Islamic community and having all these foreign fighters coming in to show the diversity of the Islamic State, the reality is that at its core, it's still very much an Arab movement. With one of the other aspects of this research that I looked at is the types of mediums that they put this content out. I think this is very important because the vast majority of it is more visual. It's not text-based, or it's not these broader lectures. So if you compare the media of Al-Qaeda to the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda historically, as I'm sure you remember the videos from Osama bin Laden or Ayman al-Zawahiri, they're just staring at the screen, wagging their finger at you and lecturing you for an hour. Maybe the first 20 minutes is talking to you about the history of the Egyptian, revolution in the 1920s, and then going on, and finally only the last 10 minutes really talking about specifically what's going on at this particular juncture. This doesn't grasp the attention of the younger audience, whereas the Islamic State has really put an emphasis on doing these Hollywood-style videos where there's short clips, there's a lot of music, there's a lot of graphics going on at the same time. It sort of is similar to video games in some respects, but also another way that they've been able to put out a lot of content without having to put too much effort, because obviously when you put out a video message, there's a lot of editing and production involved, is just these pictures, essays, and series on a daily basis of the different activities that they've been conducting. And if you add it all together, 88% of their content is visual, highlighting the sort of emotive and visceral nature that they're trying to get in not only their supporters, but those they're trying to recruit into the organization itself. And then I broke it down into different themes of what they're doing, and I'm about to get into that a little bit more specifically, since I'm talking more the quantitative aspects of the research right now. One of the interesting aspects of the Islamic State's media, though, is every day through their Al Bayan radio station, they put out a daily media military report about all their different military operations. And if you compare the military operations and specifically where they are to the official media operations, there's a huge difference in many ways. As I noted before, there is sort of an even split between the media releases officially in Iraq and Syria. But if you look at the military campaign and what they're actually doing on the ground, there's a larger disparity where Iraq actually takes up a much larger space than Syria does. So these are the key messages I wanted to focus on now, because I thought that I'd drill down a little bit into them. And these are the military, their governance activities, their dawah activities, which is essentially just proselytization or calling people to their interpretation of Islam, their hizbah activities, which is essentially their justice that they're trying to accomplish, the promotion of the caliphate, as well as reports about enemy attacks, which I think is very relevant when you're talking about StratCom. And then when you look at the overarching themes of what the Islamic State is doing, they're portraying themselves as winners, that they're very competent in what they're doing in their state-building enterprise, and that they're very pious in what they're accomplishing, whereas they portray their enemies as unjust as well as unbelievers, unsurprisingly. So when you look at the military message, it's always a winning narrative. They're never talking about when they lose. So when they withdrew from certain areas in Iraq over the past year, they didn't talk about it ever. When they withdrew from parts of Darna in Libya a few weeks or a month or two ago, they didn't mention it at all. It's always about them being on the march and them winning. They never talk about it. Another aspect is the dehumanization of their enemies. They constantly are showing pictures and videos of their enemies mutilated in these shallow graves, and just really nasty, brutal stuff. I'm not showing any of the pictures, of course. And then one of the other aspects of what they're trying to accomplish is to show off their military training camps, and that these are the building blocks of the future. And it's not just about the military campaigns now, but for the future generations. So they have these so-called Cubs institutes, where they're doing these military training for children as young as like 5 and 6 years old, all the way through whatever age. And these are just examples of pictures of them in the field, military convoys through different cities, as well as one of their training camps. In terms of governance and Hizbut, a lot of what they're trying to show is their competence, that they're providing swift justice. Because one of the issues in some of these Arab countries is that a lot of times people get held up in jail or in court forever, and there's never any resolution, or it just takes a very long time. Whereas they are able to come up with a judgment very quickly. Of course, many of the times it's somebody being shot in the head, getting their heads chopped off, their hand chopped off, and many other disgusting types of activities. One of the other aspects is their ability to run the state effectively. And most importantly, I think, in terms of the broader global audience, is that they're trying to show to their supporters, but also potential recruits, that life is actually going on inside of this territory, even though there is this broader war, but daily life continues. And the upper picture is from their public relations office, where they're having a reconciliation meeting between two clans and a tribe to come together to settle their differences, whereas the bottom is somebody is, he got in trouble for some crime, and therefore he's standing up there in the street with a placard on him saying what the particular punishments were. And that person was in particular alive, but there are cases where they'll execute people and they'll do the same thing by showing them in the streets publicly with the sign on, all bloodied up. As a deterrence. And then here are just other activities. You see the person retiling a hospital to try and re-improve it. The middle picture on the top is them starting to build a bridge. On the top of the right is them burning cigarettes because they view that as against Islam. On the bottom left is their agricultural activities, and one of the themes that you saw a lot in the spring and summer was a lot of the harvesting that they're doing of wheat and different types of products in the field. And then there's a market, and then the last one is them destroying people's graves, since they view that as polytheism. Another aspect, of course, as I noted, is Dawah activities. And a lot of this is just to try and get individuals locally to come into the fold. And the top picture is one of their media points that I mentioned earlier that are locally, that are passing out this type of information, whereas the bottom is just the particular literature that they are passing out as well. And then up here is just more examples of the different types of things. Besides that, in terms of passing this type of content out locally on the streets, or whether it's a sermon in a mosque, or whether it's in a crowded group of people. And then on the top right is an interesting thing that I think is important to point out, is that they put up billboards throughout the different villages and cities that they run to try and to sort of instill their ideas in the local population, because if you're seeing these messages on a daily basis, whether you're walking around or driving, it almost becomes second nature. And I think that this billboard is interesting in particular in that it has a particular message that they want to try and instill in people. And essentially it says in Arabic, here's the abode of Islam, here's the land of the caliphate, here's the place of loyalty to the believers and disavow the unbelievers. Here's the market of jihad. Here's the wind of paradise. Here's the glory, and here's the dignity. This is sort of the essence of what they're trying to instill in these local populations. Another aspect is the promotion of the caliphate. Of course, every part of their media campaign is a promotion, but I think there's particular aspects that relate to this, whether it's in terms of pictures of nature, trying to show off that this is really pristine and idyllic area that people are living in now. Of course, nature was the same when other Syrian rebel groups were in control of these areas, or whether the Assad regime had previously been in control, or whether the Baghdad government was in control, but they're trying to highlight that this is really God's land now. And as you can see, there's a picture of water, and then there's a shepherd and his flock. And then there's one of the sun setting. Another aspect of the promotion of the caliphate is highlighting different pledges of allegiance amongst different groups or individuals in different territories, whether it's new ones or renewal of pledges. And the top right banner is just one from Yemen, where individuals were repledging bay'ah in a video message. And then the bottom right one is a video message that you might have actually heard about in the media, where they did a tour of one of the hospitals that they're controlling. And the main speaker was an Australian foreign fighter, but he was acting as a doctor in this capacity. And I think one of the important aspects of this is that this is a perfect case to highlight how they try and create a megaphone effect or a force multiplier of their media. Because of this Australian being a part of this video message, you then had the next day the Australian media covering this everywhere. It was in the newspapers, it was in the news broadcasts, it was on the radio stations, and this highlights how they're able to broaden the message beyond just the core supporters of those who are following this on a daily basis, but potentially exposing a broader group of people to their message, because then somebody who's listening to the news broadcast might be like, whoa, the Islamic State has a hospital, they're providing care for individuals in the territory they control, and I'm not saying whether or not they actually do it in a functioning manner. It's difficult to know, obviously, since there's not independent information coming out of their territory. But maybe 1 out of 10,000 people look at this and they're like, wow, this is a lot more better than I thought it was, and then they go down a rabbit hole essentially and then potentially get caught up, and this is how somebody might join up with the group. And then the last message is this related to the enemy attacks, highlighting attacks upon ordinary Muslims. And this is really relevant to the military campaign that's going on now, because a lot of the times they describe it as this Shiite crusader conspiracy against the Sunni Muslims. And then also the infrastructure that's being destroyed, and trying to have this message that no matter what we do as Sunni Muslims, we can never be able to build our state here. And that's why we need more and more support. And these are just more pictures of the destruction of Qurans and mosques and infrastructure, as well as people being injured. So I just wanted to leave it at there. If you're interested more in the more specifics of this article, you can find it online at this link. And I just wanted to conclude by saying that I think it's important to highlight these different types of messaging streams, because people have different interests and are recruited in different ways, or they might get excited for the Islamic State in different ways. And as a result, because they have more personal or different types of messaging, some people might get hooked in different ways, and that there's not this broader one message. So if you're looking at coming up with some type of counter narrative, in many ways it shouldn't be just one specific net message, but many different streams, and one that might be more personal than one general bland one. So thank you.